Welcome to A Ride on the Outside. MMA is full of people on the inside, but what about the ones who watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with your hosts, Tom Albano and Zain Bando. My goodness. Well, welcome to the start of a new era, the start of a new show here on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. This is the MMA Outsiders. We are going to be talking everything MMA on this show, from the UFC and beyond, reviews of cards, previews of cards, best bets, reviews of previous cards every now and again. It is going to be an MMA fan's paradise here on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. If you like MMA, this show is going to be for you. So, let's take the chance to introduce ourselves. First of all, if you are a follower of this network, you know me pretty well by now. You should at least. For those of you who are uninitiated, I am Tom Albano. I am a contributor at FanSided MMA, as well as the co-host of the Empty the Bench show you see every Wednesday afternoon here on the Empty the Bench network. And joining me is somebody who, for a while, used to work with me at FanSided MMA.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Zain Bando. As Tom alluded to earlier, I was once a ex-contributor at FanSided MMA. I just became a staff writer at bjpen.com as of August 1st, and I've been freelancing about MMA since 2019, and this has been an adventure that's been in the works for quite some time now. I'm happy to be here. It was very nice of Tom to ask me to do this show with him, and I'm really much looking forward to diving into the world that is MMA, and that is one of the few sports that has literally no off season. So I'm very much looking forward to it.
Definitely. And we're just coming off of a pretty crazy week, and we're about to get into actually a pretty busy August itself, between UFC cards, the upcoming UFC 278, between the PFL playoffs, and of course, we're just coming off of UFC 277. Also, a big thank you to the network sponsor, NAC. Now, make sure to go get the NAC sling bag that we in the link that we produce in the description of all of our shows on the network. Remember, NAC, the one bag life. And on most shows, if you go to order the NAC sling bag, you're going to get free shipping. So, all good stuff here. All right. So, as we alluded to, UFC 277 had just happened. So, how the show is going to work is we'll always talk about the big three headlines when it comes to the MMA world. We'll recap a previous cards. We'll have a look at some of the upcoming cards, do some predictions, do some best bets. But let's kick this off with recapping UFC 277, because that kind of plays a little hand in the big three things of this week. So big thing number one, of course, Amanda Nunes is once again the women's featherweight, the women's GOAT. She is once again the women's bantamweight champion. Dominant victory over Julianna Pena, the first two-time women's bantamweight champion in UFC history, and more importantly, the first ever UFC fighter, male or female, to be a two-time champ. Lost champ status and regained it. So, Zain, tell me your thoughts, because I talked about this on the stream that I did, the 15-20 minute stream that I did post UFC 277, which you could go check that out. It was pretty dominant. It was no contest at all.
Yeah, to put it lightly, the fight was extremely dominant. It was much different than the first fight. You could tell that Amanda Nunes had regained her confidence from when she was a double champion, and just made Pena look. I hate to use this term because I don't really like to use it very often, but she made Julianna Pena look very overrated, in that like the first fight was a fluke. It was interesting to kind of note Nunes had her hurt numerous times. In terms of the three knockdowns that took place over the course of the first two rounds, and what was even more intimidating was, I don't know if you watched her post-fight media availability, but she even noted to the media that she could have finished Julianna whenever she wanted and chose not to. Maybe simply it was because it was passive or what have you. But I thought it was very interesting that Nunes hurt her multiple times, dropped her numerous times, and was unable to get the finish. regardless, a win's a win. And a big question I wanted to bring up to you is there's now this whole debate as to whether or not a trilogy between these two should take place. I'm on the side of no. I don't think it's warranted. She literally got 50-43. All three judges had Nunes with the 5-0 shutout. You could have argued 4-1. But I just want to get your thoughts because I really don't think a trilogy is warranted. And I really do think you have to give that fight to Valentina. Although Nunes is up 2-0 in that series, I really do feel like that's the most compelling matchup for her at this moment in time. I know Ketlin Vieira called her out on Twitter the night of the fight as well. Would I be interested in seeing that fight? Not really, just because stylistically, I don't think Vieira really matches the ball that well with Nunes. But I wanted to get your thoughts on that and just kind
Mhm.
of where Nunes stands alone in terms of her now being the double champ once again.
So it's funny that you brought it up because, yeah, all the judges had different scores, but it was just because one gave no 10-8 rounds, one gave one gave two. Personally, I had one 10-8 round. That second round where she did the drop Pena three times, that was the one I gave the 10-8.
I
I did
agree. I
I
had it.
did find it a little interesting that apparently Nunes said afterwards that, oh, she could have finished Pena, but she wanted to make a statement, which I think is kind of interesting for her to come out and say that when in those later rounds, especially that fourth round, she went and grappled with Pena, which I thought was a mistake. And a couple of times it nearly cost her. We could have had one angle away from potentially a submission, and then what would we be talking about? So much such a different story this time. But you're right, it was absolutely dominant. Now, as far as whether I think a trilogy is necessary, no. It, it feels like when you have a quick finish, like the Cyborg Nunes fight, or if
Right.
you have such a dominant performance like this, it's hard to justify a rematch. And my personal opinion is I think she learned her lesson the first time in that she knew what Pena did last time. Pena went at her, no mercy, constant pressure, and Nunes tired out. And I think also part of that is she easily wrote Pena off. And to be fair, all bunch of us in the media, we did. We wrote Pena off very quickly in that fight. And guess what? Julianna Pena got her Buster Douglas moment. It happens in these things. It happens in combat sports. But Nunes has justified her. I mean, she has fixed her wrong. She did have her, little comeback, and now she has proven that maybe that first fight was a fluke. I do like, however, that Dana White, because you mentioned this trilogy fight with Shevchenko, possibly. Dana
Right.
White, for the longest time, has said no to that because he was happy with Valentina at flyweight. And to be fair, Valentina just as dominant at flyweight as Nunes has been at the bantamweight scene. I would say the featherweight scene too, but what featherweight scene is there really in the
Right.
UFC?
There's none. There's none at the moment. I mean, you look at the rankings, and it's just Nunes at the top as champion, which leads me to another question. Now that
Mhm.
you're kind of segueing into that, what is there? What do you think, in your opinion, is the UFC's just kind of reasoning for why this division still exists, considering that it's been inactive since what, June of 2020 now, and we've really seen no progression of the division since that time. Like, what do you think that is? And as well, do you think Dana's a little bit desperate for Nunes to have a challenger, considering that Valentina, that trilogy fight is really the only one left for her that's a suitable opponent. I
Well,
kind of wanted to get your thoughts on those two things as well.
mhm. So the featherweight one, I'll start off by saying, well, that's Dana's own fault. He rushed that division quickly once it became apparent that Cyborg wouldn't drop to 135. And honestly, number one, that's Dana's own fault for assuming Cyborg would do that. And number two, those plans were kind of already derailed by the time Cyborg got into the UFC
Right.
because that was right after Ronda Rousey got her butt whooped by Holly Holm. And then 6 months after, 6 months or 7 months after Cyborg debuted, Nunes sent Rousey packing over to the WWE.
Right.
But but the thing is, it could have been there. They could have done more borrowing from the likes of Invicta. They had a whole tough season. That tough season a year or so later with Cormier and Stipe, I
Right.
think that they could have used that to get women in, and instead they did like they did with Holly Holm and Jermaine DeBrandon, where they had bantamweights moving up to featherweight, which was, it
Absurd.
didn't need, yeah, it did
And,
not need to happen.
it led to one of the most controversial decisions probably in women's MMA history, and just one of the weirdest women's fights period if you go back and really dissect it. A lot of people don't,
Oh, when
didn't.
Cyborg got suspended, so they did Holm DeBrandon for that
Right,
fight.
right,
Right.
right, right, exactly. Yeah, 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 exactly.
So that's on Dana. Now, as far as the bantamweight goes, I I haven't. I'm going to admit that I have not rewatched that fight since. But that first fight in that moment, I mean that second fight with Nunes and Shevchenko, the one for the belt in that moment, I thought
Mhm.
Shevchenko won. I'll have to
I did.
rewatch and see, but I had Shevchenko winning that fight. So I kind of do want to see a Shevchenko Nunes 3, especially because this is another thing. Because when you have a controversial decision like this, I mean, look at Figueiredo and Moreno. You had the draw, and then you had Figueiredo winning the third fight, and now we are going to get a fourth fight, but we'll get to that in a second. But Ketlin Vieira, I mean, I actually wouldn't be too mad. I do like the Shevchenko fight more, obviously, but I wouldn't be too
I
mad.
do too. It's just like if you think about it. Well, obviously we're not casual fans. We're longtime followers of the sport. But if you think about it from a casual fan's perspective, that maybe only watches 2 to 3 pay-per-views a year, does the casual fan really want to see Catlin Vieira versus Amanda Nunes? I,
Right.
I
And
really don't. I really don't think so.
and maybe the home Vieira split decision, maybe that one was a little weird. And I mean, you look at her list, few fights. You had Holly Holm, Misha Tate, Yana Kunitskaya, and Sajara Eubanks. And Yana Kunitskaya, that loss, she's 3-1. Yana was her only loss, but that loss also, she also missed weight. She was at 138 pounds for that fight. And
Right.
so here's what I'm going to say. I think she does deserve it, but do I think she's going to beat a Nunes? It's funny that I'm saying this after saying, oh, we easily wrote off Pena, but I don't know if the level of competition, that Ketlin Vieira has faced is going to be ready. Maybe if this was, 2016, 2017, we had that Holm and Tate, or even earlier than that, I'd say yes, but I don't know if 2022 Holm and Tate does it for me.
I would concur with that. Nonetheless, though, Amanda Nunes does regain her 2 titles, does cement her legacy as the greatest female MMA fighter of all time, which leads me to my last question before we move on. And my answer to this is going to be no, just considering how Dana has felt about this in the past. But MMA Twitter, if you look every couple of weeks, they keep clamoring for it. They want to see the rematch. They want to see Nunes Cyborg too. And I've kind of lived with the reality that that fight is just simply never going to happen
No.
because Cyborg and the UFC can't do business. I'm sure you're on the same wavelength with that. Is that
Yes, but I think it's also sorry, Zane. Sorry, Zane. Yeah, yes, but I think it's also a little bit on UFC in that not just Cyborg can't do business with UFC, but UFC doesn't do business with anybody. Co-promotion fights, they don't do that stuff. They did.
right?
They did it once when Chuck Liddell went over to Pride in '03 and competed in the
Right.
Grand Prix. That's the only time I can ever think of them doing such a thing. But
Well,
UFC,
if you want to count McGregor Mayweather, that's considered co-promotion
right?
too.
That wasn't just co-promote. That was co-sport as well.
Right, right, right,
Um,
right.
my point was just the UFC. It kind of reminds me of WWE in a little bit. They live in their own umbrella. They live in their own universe. If you're outside the UFC, it's very rare for them to give a mention to a rival promotion. Maybe they'll give it to an international one like a KSW, but
Right.
but very rarely do you hear them talk about Bellator or PFL. The only times you ever really hear them talk about like Bellator, I know they just mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, uh, but the first time I remember hearing it, and really the most time you ever hear it, is with Michael Chandler.
Right, right,
Uh,
exactly.
yeah, so
And
this
and not to mention the fact that I don't even think you heard it, or maybe briefly, Eddie Alvarez, but I would say Michael Chandler is the only fighter where they continuously would mention that. So that was interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's a little. I think it's because they have to give him some form of credibility. I
Right.
mean, you see Justin Gaethje coming in already fighting Michael Johnson 2017. Now, to Gaethje's credit, he didn't even need the WSOF mention because he goes and has a fight of the night with Michael Johnson. But
Right. Right.
Michael Chandler, I mean, if you didn't watch Bellator and you didn't pay attention, maybe you wouldn't know and why they're throwing him to a fight with Dan Hooker, and then all of a sudden Chandler knocks Hooker out.
Right. Right. Which I'm sure a lot of people watching that card who were tuned in to see Poirier and Connor had never seen Michael Chandler fight before. So that's another interesting thing. But yeah, again, Nunes regains her two titles. It'll be interesting to see what the UFC does with her next. And as you and I both know, that Valentina fight is still out there. And a little side note on Valentina, she's very lucky that she got past the Tyler Santos fight, because a lot of people thought that decision in itself was super controversial, and I have not watched that fight since it took place. But in real time, I did think that Santos won, but that's neither here nor there. It'll be very interesting to see what coincides with that trilogy if it does end up coming to fruition, for sure.
And speaking of championship fights, speaking of rematches, Brandon Moreno finishes Kai Kara France, so he is the interim flyweight champion. And it seems like we are going to get a fourth Moreno Figueiredo fight. So I'll start by saying I don't want to say one sided because you're going to get the feeling when you say one sided of what Pena Nunes was. It wasn't one sided in that way, but Moreno just Car France seemed to have some trouble with Moreno's pressure. Like Moreno, like I mentioned with Pena about the first Pena Nunes fight, Moreno just brought the pressure, and eventually he was able to wear Car France's body down, where he just had to hit that one shot, and Car France kind of collapsed. It's funny, we kind of had two body shot delay reactions on this show. You first had,
We
well,
sure did.
yeah, you had Brandon Moreno, like I just mentioned, knocking out Kai Kara France with the body shot, the body kick, and the body kick. But then also in Drew Dober's fight with Rafael Alves on the prelims, he had a very weird delay reaction when he got hit like right in the solar plexus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was obviously a very very impressive performance by Moreno in a fight that he was kind of banking on that being for the real belt, just considering what's going on with Figueredo at this point. But he fought like he was the champion, and Kai Kara France, is still one of the best fighters in the world. So you can't really knock this one entirely on him. Could he have fought a little better? Yeah, but Brandon Moreno is just the more superior fighter. And to be honest with you, I think if you run back that Moreno Figgy trilogy fight 100 times, I would say that Moreno wins the vast majority of them. It was just on that night the judges felt that Figgy had done enough to win. My big question in regards to Moreno is, is this? I mean, in my opinion, this is just a rare instance of, this being a 4-time thing. But I mean, at this point, if Moreno beats Figgy in a quadrilogy, you know, do you keep going, because then it's 2-2. Like I don't know where you stop with this. But Dana White has said in several interviews, as you would probably allude to, he said you could put those two in there every weekend, and people would be excited.
Well,
So
I'm gonna counter that. If we're gonna go on that logic, 2-2 and a fifth fight is necessary. We got to get Wanderlei Silva and Quinton Rampage Jackson up in gear. They're going to have to go at it one more time. And I don't know if I want to see that.
no, I don't know. I don't want to see. I don't want to see that either.
I don't
No
want to see
way.
poor Wandy taking more shots to the head. I don't want to see that.
No,
But
I no.
but maybe with Moreno and Car France, it's different. Now, I can't I can't think of a time in the UFC where we had four fights. I think Shamrock and Ortiz was just 3, because the rematch had a controversial ending, so they had to redo it live
I,
on Spike TV.
I know this for certain. This is the first time that a championship fight has needed 4 fights. So
I know Bellator had to do it with one of the Pitbull brothers.
right, I'm just saying from a UFC standpoint, though, this is the
Yeah,
first
from
time.
its UFC, this is a first though.
Right, right.
You know what? In that case, why not? I welcome it. Let's have Moreno versus Figueiredo for a 4th time. It's history. It's the first time ever UFC would do a 4th championship fight between 2 people, and I think it's gonna be, well, you hope at least it's gonna be another banger, because it seems like even in that second fight when Moreno submitted Figueiredo and it didn't go to distance, that was still fun. The
Right,
third fight was still fun. Like, I understand the concept of, doing something over and over again to the point where, it just doesn't become fun anymore, but it could still be very fun, that fight, and I'm all for it. So,
I
and I
just I just love how every single fight of this I guess you could say series of fights has been for a belt, which I think is super which I think is super unique. It's not like, the first fight, they were both in the top 15 and they were just fighting a regular 3 round fight. No, these have been 3 high level championship fights, which is so rare. It's almost
and
a
actually
recipe for success.
and actually, Zane, you said it would be 2-2. Technically, this should be the final fight, because technically the first time was a draw.
Right,
So Figueiredo, I get where you're coming from, because Figueiredo technically retains the title because it is a draw, but technically it
right.
is a 1-1-1. So actually, further proof that I would say no to a 5th fight, because this should be the ultimate decider. But, I mean, if somehow there was a 5th fight, I wouldn't be against it, especially when you consider that Figueiredo's 2 wins. See, even I did it. The draw
You
and
just did
figure
it.
the draw and Figueiredo's win. Those were very close fights. Those on the scorecards could have fallen either way.
And you could argue that Moreno won all 3 fights. You could also argue that
That's true
Figueiredo
too.
won all 3 fights.
So that's why I'm saying, if we get a solid, non-controversial finish, anything here, an ending to this fight where everybody, or mostly everybody, because MMA Twitter is a very weird place. Weird might be an understatement.
Yeah,
But if most people can agree on the result of Moreno versus Figueiredo 4, then that should be the feud ender.
for sure, for sure. And
Actually,
it just capped off, two title fights to where everybody was really excited for them. And just with Moreno being as popular of a fighter that he is and is beloved by as many fans as he's, you got to feel super happy for him that he's getting another chance to run it back with an old rival of his. And I can hardly wait for that fight, and hopefully it's in Brazil. The UFC said that they're targeting Brazil for next year. That would be a great place to do it in April or May, and let's see if they can get it done. But yeah,
actually, I do have one question I do want to ask you. I do want to ask you about the post-fight little thing in the octagon between the two,
sure.
because I was a little, like, uh-oh, here we go. They're going to get into a whole thing. But then it was just absolutely respectful. It was kind of do you think what happened afterwards was necessary? Because it seemed like, I don't know, did it seem like to me where Dana was saying that it wasn't necessary, but I mean, it was respectful also in a way.
Yeah. So Dana has made that clear that he's not as big of a fan anymore of guys getting into the cage, to square off for the next fight right after it's over, because sometimes it totally gets blown out of proportion or the fight never happens. A great example is Cormier and Brock when their whole scuffle happened a couple years ago. But you know what? I think with the way that the rivalry, has kind of brewed and stuff, and just the amount of high level talent there is between those two fighters, it actually got me really excited for a fourth fight. In fact, until they showed him in the crowd, I had no idea Figgy was even there.
No.
So that made it super cool. I can understand Dana's worry about that just because obviously with security being in there, them being live on ESP, and they don't want something to happen. But you know what? More power to them. It sells the fight. They can they can make it as part of the promo package. It would be awesome. So
And I think Dana's also. I don't think he's ever been the same with that stuff ever since Khabib jumped out of the cage. Ever since then, I feel like that's held him down a little bit.
I concur.
All right, so we'll go back to UFC 277, talk about the rest of the card in just a little bit. But another news item I do want to talk about that you also want to talk about. Let's talk about big rising stars. So I feel like with an intro episode, this should also be an intro topic. Who is the next big rising star in MMA? And Zan, I'm going to let you go first. Who do you think is the next big?
Sure. I mean, I think it's hard not to say Paddy Pimblett. I mean, have you ever seen a rise in the UFC this big, this fast? I mean, I know we had Conor McGregor's meteoric rise to stardom, but have you ever seen so many people be excited about a fighter that literally just started in the UFC not even a year and a half ago, and he's selling out the O2 Arena like it's nothing. I think he's a big star. You always paired him with Molly McCann on every card. Dana's made it clear that now Paddy Pimblett needs to fight in a major U.S. show at MSG or at T-Mobile Arena. I'd love to see that. Another rising star. I don't even know if you could really call him a rising star, but another guy that's totally ascended very quickly to the top of the sport is Sean O'Malley. He's got Peter Yan coming up this fall. That's going to be a really massive fight to see if a Dana White Contender Series alum can beat the number one ranked guy in the world that isn't the current champions. I would say um, I would say those three are big, but if you were to give me one right now as to who the biggest rising stars, you got to take Patty the Batty Pimblett, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's pretty, clear that the UFC, as I call it, the UFC machine, is fully 100% behind Paddy Pimblett being the next big star in their promotion, the next big international star. And, I know Paddy said after his last fight and the post fight that basically about fighting potentially New York and Boston, that he didn't want to fight in New York because the state tax and all that. I'm going to counter that argument. I think he needs to fight in New York, yes,
I,
next. And
I, I
I'm not saying that with bias because I'm a New Yorker, but
right.
I'm saying that because, and I was trying to think of a good example, and you know what example came to my mind? Wang Zhili, because she goes and beats Jessica Andrade, and Andrade's first defense for the championship, for the strawweight championship. Then she goes and has the unbelievable, in my opinion, the greatest women's MMA fight in history with Joanna
Concur.
Jacek. And
Concur.
hmm, did you say something?
No, I agree. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Keep
but
going.
okay. And then Dana, after that fight, at the post fight for UFC 248, he proclaimed it. He said the Garden is next for Wei Li. Now, unfortunately, it took us about a year and a little over a year and a half to get there because the pandemic hit. So we
Right.
didn't really see. We saw fights at the Apex, and then we didn't really see Wang Zhili. Then the first fight back, the first event back with fans in Jacksonville. The next year, she loses the title to Rose, but fortunately, they're able to get the Rose Whaley rematch for the Garden card in 2021, and they delivered.
They did. They absolutely did.
They produced a close fight. And now you're talking Whaley Joanna 2, and Whaley beats Joanna. So what I'm trying to say is the Garden played a role in the trajectory of Wang Zhili. So I feel like Patty it would do the same, and especially considering if you think back to when Connor fought at the Garden, do you remember how rowdy that place was? Do you remember all the Irish support? I know Boston, there would be a ton of Irish support too, but yeah, there was a ton of Irish
I
support
do.
for McGregor as well.
I do remember that, and even this is kind of on a side note, but even when I went to Poirier McGregor 3, the amount of people from Ireland that flew into Vegas just to see him fight was absurd. And I just feel like Paddy Pimblett is another one of those fighters where his fans will travel wherever he fights. And there's no doubt in my mind that if he opens a pay per view or is the second fight on the pay per view, people will flock to see him fight. I just feel like this guy was tailor made to fight in massive arenas, sell out massive arenas, talk tons of trash, um, and he's absolutely over delivering on all of his promises of what he said he was going to do in such a short amount of time. The big worry that I have for Pimblett is will the UFC push him too fast? Is the next big question.
Well, that was going to be my next thing. Now, in terms of an opponent for him, I don't know. The only thing I'm going to say is his next opponent, it cannot be a top 15. You cannot do it. You cannot, you know, he's not he's not ready for it. Not that he's not ready for it, but that I need to see something else. He needs to have, like, it would be advantageous on the UFC's part to run a garden, a Madison Square or a TD Garden in Boston, and give him that big supportive crowd, and in front of a, again, that big Irish support crowd, and him to deliver another big victory against another person who is unranked but up and coming. And then you build that momentum. Then maybe you give the top 15, and then maybe you push a little more. Do the slow build. You know who I think had the best build of anybody in MMA?
Who do you think it
AJ
was?
McKee. AJ McKee in Bellator.
Interesting. Interesting.
Bellator they took him in as a pro. He didn't have any fights as a pro, and they slowly built him up over the next several years until he got the undefeated versus champion final in that featherweight Grand Prix against Pitbull, and he ends up having the big win. That was a big payoff for Bellator. Even though he lost the rematch in controversial fashion for that first L, I still think that whole ride there was great for McKee. It may have been maybe it may have been risky because one loss could have damaged him. But maybe if you get a loss early on, Paddy Pimblett lost his Cage Warriors title, but that didn't damage him from coming over to the UFC and making the impact he has now.
Right.
So I think you're right. Like, I think there has to be a fine line between the UFC machine pushing it, and let's take our time here and let's build him. So here's what I say: have him find the Garden next against another up and comer who's not ranked.
Or were you thinking Ilya Taporia?
I could see that one, but now here's my next one. Then maybe if you have a good Garden crowd and you are like the performer of the night, maybe you can pressure Dana a little bit to have a card in Boston or something where you're the headliner. I think they could do that.
True.
Or
If he,
then you could,
true. If he headlined a fight night, that would be huge.
like
That would.
Connor did. If you
Mhm.
remember, after he knocked out Poirier, he didn't go right into the interim featherweight title and featherweight title fights. He had a fight with Dennis Seaver where he headlined. I think that was in Boston too.
And he also had a fight in his home country against Diego Brandao before that.
Right. So my point is he has all the momentum. If he wanted to do a New York and Boston card, I'm certain maybe he can whisper Dana's ear a little bit for that. Or depending on how his next performance does, maybe he does end up on a pay-per-view card in Vegas. The world right now is Paddy Pimblett's oyster. The UFC just has to be careful of how much they push him. Again, that fine line.
Agreed. I'm very curious to see where he'll end up by 2024. That'll be really interesting to see if his meteoric rise can continue into then because I really do think 2023 could be the year of Paddy Pimblett, and then 2024 could really be the year where he breaks out into a massive global superstar. So you never know. But yeah, at the moment, Paddy Pimblett is the biggest rising star in MMA.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. One news item I do want to talk about because I'm kind of curious about your thoughts on this. So, Jake Paul, Hasim Rahman Jr., that fight, which was supposed to headline the Garden this weekend, canceled. The whole event canceled. There was a whole dispute over the weight of the fight over Hasim Rahman's weight. Now, good on the promotion that anybody who did an early purchase of the pay-per-view, anybody who bought a ticket, everyone's getting a full refund. They're not going off scheming or anything like that with anybody's money. But you had Jake Paul side and the promotion pretty much saying, oh, Rahman Jr. agreed to a weight, and then basically for like 14 days he lost maybe 1 pound maximum, and Rahman wanted to move the weight, and Paul said no. Number one, Zam, my question first, who do you blame for this? And second of all, did you have any interest in this?
Yeah, this is a very good question. I am on the side of Rahman Jr. And one of the biggest reasons why is, number one, you're gonna learn very quickly on this show that I am not a Jake Paul supporter by any means. So when I first saw this, I'm like, oh, okay, this is gonna be interesting to see what the Twitter banter is back and forth. And I really do feel like with the amount of experience Rahman Jr. has, I really do feel like he is a true professional, and he wanted to hold himself to that. The whole theory that 3 weeks went by, and he was only able to lose 1 pound. I could understand the difficulty in that, but I just feel like Jake Paul's manipulative tactics to where he kept selling the fight, and then of course the fight doesn't even happen. I just feel like do you feel like in some ways that Jake Paul tried to set this up, or do you think that this was genuinely, a true cancellation in a fight that wasn't meant to happen? Because I started to have a bad feeling about last week. I'm like, there's kind of a lack of promotion for this fight. Like, is this fight really going to happen?
You're right.
And sure enough, it doesn't. It doesn't even occur.
You're right. So I'm kind of mixed on this because I'm trying to answer the question, but I'm going to be going off on some sort of tangent because Rahman Jr. I mean, you're right. Here's what I feel on the weight issue. First of all, I think Paul he's a celebrity boxer. I know he's a legitimate professional boxer, but he is a
Yeah.
YouTuber turned boxer. I think if Rahman wanted to move up in weight, I think that would have been fine. Although I'm not going to give Rahman, I'm not going to give him the angel's wings and the halo because you are the professional boxer. It is your job to make weight. So if that's true that you lost 1 pound in 14 days, like what happened? Did your body shut down on you early? Like I don't like the radio silence, but you are right in that there was a little lack of promotion for this fight. Maybe it's because Jake Paul, the most recent guys he's been fighting have been Ben Askren, Tyron Woodley, guys who, have a name to them. So you have the interest on the MMA and the boxing ends, but
Right.
on the so you're
Right, and even you could throw in the entertainment end with him knocking out Nate Robinson
Nate
too.
Robinson, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but on the flip, so yes, you are kind of having your audience by not having the MMA ending, but on the flip, you're also Jake Paul. You're also, one of the biggest YouTubers, like him or not, right now. And you have a brother, your older brother, who has been, fairly tearing it up in his appearance at WrestleMania and at SummerSlam. Like, you are a marketer, in other words. Like, why was there such a lack of promotion compared to, like, I get it. Maybe because you have your audience, and maybe on that end I understand it, but maybe there could have been a little more to it.
True. And I have to ask you this question because I found it absolutely hilarious. When this fight was canceled, like an hour or so later, Showtime airs what was going to be the all access countdown special for the fight. I'm like, this is really bizarre. Or it's like, okay, now this is gonna air, and they're trying to hype you up for a fight that that literally just got canceled. I was hoping that like a ticker would pop up at the bottom of the screen saying that the fight had been canceled. When I saw that, I'm like, oh, this is gonna be interesting to see what Tom thinks about this, because I started watching. I'm like, oh, this is really weird that Showtime is going to actually go ahead and continue with their regularly scheduled programming of airing all acts. So that was another interesting part
Mm-hmm.
of this whole thing too. And I'm sure And now I'm not sure you probably did catch this. Dana White's theory is that most valuable promotions didn't sell enough tickets. Are you buying that piece of speculation, or do you think that's a little bit too far fetched?
Not that it's far fetched. Again, you're also Jake Paul. I feel like some of those people who were purchasing those Jake Paul fights early on, like Paul and Askren. I would even go as far as to say, the Mike Tyson fight that Paul fought and Dave Robinson on the undercard. They tune in because he's Jake Paul, not because, they're boxing fans or they're combat sports fans. They put it for his name value. So, you know, I just don't know. I feel like why are they going after, why is Paul going after Hasim Rahman Jr.? Now supposedly there was just I don't know how much serious of talk this was that maybe Jake Paul could be a WBC ranked boxer.
Yeah, I heard about that.
I don't know how to feel about that.
I think it's bizarre considering he hasn't fought a legit professional boxer yet, and Rahman Jr. was going to be his first fight. You mean to tell me that fighting two washed up MMA wrestlers and an NBA and a former NBA player is going to make you a WBC ranked boxer? Are you serious?
I
I,
guess money talks.
I'm sorry. I just don't believe it, and I feel like it makes the WBC look really bad. And in that instance, I really do. But we'll see what happens. The fight that just got canceled. Rahman Jr. is still out there. Potential Nate Diaz fight is out there. A potential Tommy Fury fight is out there. I don't know. I just feel like Jake Paul's doing his thing. It's great, but as Dana has stated multiple times, the kid has a really short shelf life. If they make one mistake as a promotion, they're totally toast. Look at what happened to Triller. There's a good chance that something might happen to most valuable promotions. He better be very careful as
Mm-hmm.
he goes through this remainder of his little run here that he makes some smart business decisions, because I can guarantee you that they definitely lost money on that. No, no question about it. We'll never know how much money they actually did lose, but there's no question that they did lose most likely a significant chunk of that of the entire gate, let alone the purchase on Showtime pay per view. It's a big loss for everybody involved. It's a big loss for Amanda Serrano. It's a big loss for everybody else on the card. That was going to be a really, really big card at Madison Square Garden.
See,
And
sorry, Jay, but you talk about the lack of promotion. Like I forgot Amanda Serrano was competing on that card.
I mean, and Amanda Serrano was supposed to be the co-main event of that card. Mm-hmm.
I feel like if you're Serrano, you got to get like a main event card now. Like now you got to figure out a way to, like man, I feel really bad for Amanda Serrano now. Like that was supposed to be something great for her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was supposed to be a bounce back, from her loss to Katie Taylor, and it was
Mm-hmm.
going to be her. It was going to be her second consecutive fight in New York in New York City. It was going to be a big deal. Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's briefly talk about the rest of that UFC 277 card. I think the biggest story outside of the two title fights would have to be probably the controversial finish with Derek Lewis and Sergey Pavlovich. Uh, I don't know. So to explain, if you caught my stream after the show on Saturday, I kind of explained, but I'll explain a little more brief here. Basically, Pavlovich seemed to knock out Lewis. Lewis did the old face plant, but quickly got back up. But as he was getting up, Mergliata already had waved the fight off. My opinion is, I've still had to think about it for a few days, but I understand where Mergliata is coming from, but I'm still kind of split because, yes, Derek Lewis was getting up, but Zan, hopefully you understand, like the face plant is like the universal thing for a referee. It's like you have to step in if somebody
Oh
face plants.
yeah. In real time, it looked bad. Also, I'll say that. But then you watch the replay, and you see him get up right away, and you're like, wait, what just happened? So I don't know. I feel like, I think it's one of those, and people harp on referees every weekend, but I really do think it's one of those where you could make a judgment call, and that's exactly what Dan Miragliotta did. And there are going to be people who agree with it, and there are going to be people who disagree with it. I happen to agree with it because what more was Derek Lewis going to do after getting rocked like that, knowing that his chin, to be fair, is a little bit suspect. Number one, and number two, he's never won in Texas as a UFC fighter as of yet. And I just feel like Pavlovich was throwing so many huge power shots that there was no way that Lewis was going to be able to survive more of the was had Merkley had not stepped in, because it looked like he was down, and it looked like he was done.
Right.
And
It's
and
not
I,
like he was getting rocked for the first time. It had been a few seconds for him being rocked.
right. By the way, as a side note, Pavlovich, that is easily the biggest in of his UFC career so far, easily the highest ranked guy that he's ever beat.
Absolutely, absolutely. Uh, and again, you're right, because it's kind of like the bang bang play of baseball. Like if somebody is trying to steal a base, and if very quick, some runner slides in, and the fielder makes the tag. It's like one of those quick bang bang plays where it's like it's up to the umpire's discretion, and then maybe you do the replay afterwards. But I don't know if replay was needed on this one, because again, Lewis face planted. It's one of those things where it's like it's a universal ref thing where it's like if you see somebody face plant, even for that quick second like Lewis, it's like, oh no, stop, stop, stop.
Right, exactly.
Alexander Pantoja, the quick neck crank of Alex Perez. I think Pantoja, if Pantoja is willing to wait, or if Pantoja gets another fight and wins, I think he's pretty much now set himself in good position to be the
Yeah,
Moreno Figgy 4
one
challenger.
100%. And Dana even alluded to it that Pantoja couldn't be in a better place than what he's in right now after that win against Perez. And as you know, we've seen, it's quite rare to see a standing rear naked choke, but a standing neck crank, pretty rare.
And in the backpack position, I believe. Like he was on the back.
It was, and just with how fast he did it, I believe it was 91 seconds into the.
Yep.
That is some high level stuff. They're good for Pantoja. It's a big win for, as has been around for a long time. He'll be back for sure, but that is without a doubt Pantoja's biggest win of his UFC career. And yeah, I think playing the waiting game, although Dane is super against it, I do think playing the waiting game in this instance, because of how rare quadrilogy fights are, is Pantoja's best course of action. Or of course he could take another fight. I would be down to see him in Kai Kara France. That would be a good fight. Just considering that Kara France is coming off a loss to Moreno. Pantoja is one of the best fighters in the world, ranked in the top five. It would be a fight that a lot of people would be interested in. It would see if Kara France is still right back in position to fight for a championship. And again, I think if you're the UFC, that's the next fight you make. If that is if Pantoja is not willing to wait around for Figgy Moreno for, in my
Mhm.
opinion.
Ankalaev, I mean, that was pretty one sided. That was hard to watch. Just
Mhm.
Anthony Smith getting absolutely battered.
It
I
sure was. It sure was.
I think this is what I say. I like Anthony Smith. I want him to make a recovery and come back and all, but I think of his days, his little magical run where he got to challenge John Jones. I think that's it. That put it to bed.
Yeah. Could you argue that it could be time for him to retire soon?
The thing is with Anthony Smith, I mean, he's 34. He started his MMA career very early, but on the flip, you also do think about all the damage. Therefore, he's kind of taken. He was a journeyman fighter up until this big run.
Yeah, he's been in some wars. Well, it'll be interesting to see for Ankalaev. Is the is the next logical step, fighting someone like a Jan Blachowicz of.
Absolutely.
Do you think he's ready? Do you think he's ready for that?
Like I said, like I actually said on the stream post show, I want to see, and I think they're going to do Jan Glover too. So I wouldn't give Ankalaev the shot right away, even though he's called for it. But I mean, Jiri Glover too. Pardon me. But
Right.
Jan, it's like a next opponent, and if he wins, maybe that's the title shot. I think that's perfect. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's perfect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Uh,
I think light heavyweight cannot be in a better place with the amount of talent there is in the top five. And a lot of people have harped on the light heavyweight division for years, but the amount of just great fighters that are currently in the top five at the moment, you can't beat it. It's in a really good place, and now you got that potential massive rematch between Yuri and Glover. Light heavyweights in a very good place. So yeah, overall though, just kind of just kind of wanted to get your final thoughts. If you were to give UFC 277 a grade, what would you give it? And I'm just kind of curious. Do you think the UFC's first trip back to Dallas in 4 years was a success?
so I am somewhere between. I'm probably gonna go B or B minus because pay-per-view card delivered. I kind of think the undercard kind of disappointed on this one. I feel like the undercard needed a little bit more. I think the Dober, as I mentioned before, with the punch in the solar plexus, that knockout was a big performer. I think your other really big performer, Michael Morales, maybe with that crazy kind of finish that he did to get the TKO. But then I think my personal winner on the undercard, even though he won by a decision, Hamdi, first Egyptian fighter in UFC history, and he actually surprised, and he showed personality. He showed, you know, great heavyweight action. Although I got very worried. I thought that third round stand up, like towards the last end, was completely unnecessary, and then he got rocked. And I said, once the final horn sound, I said, "Oh no!" And we're in Texas. He's going to lose a split decision now. Fortunately, I think the judges kind of got that one right, but one judge, of course, gave that third round because of that unnecessary, get
Mm-hmm.
up like that wasn't necessary. But I feel great for Hamdi, and he's kind of my performer of the undercard.
Yeah, I would have to give it to Morales, but I could see where Hamdi falls into that equation too. He would be my number two. So overall, I would give UFC 277 a B. I think it was a very successful return to Dallas, and it'll be interesting to see where they go from here in terms of who they would bring back to Dallas. And overall, I thought it was a very successful pay per view and one that was very entertaining to watch for sure.
Definitely. All right. For the next 10 or 15 minutes here, let's talk about the upcoming card. So, PFL 7, which is the first part of the PFL playoffs, UFC Vegas 59. Which one do you want to discuss first?
I would prefer to start with the UFC event.
Cool. So, we got a main event of Thiago Santos and Jamal Hill. You got Vicente Luque and Jeff Neal in the co-main event, and then you've got, of course, the tough finale fights with Juliana Miller and Brogan Walker, and then at women's flyweight and then at heavyweight, Zach Poga and Mohammed Usman, the brother of current UFC welterweight champion Kamaru Usman. Uh, you also got on the main card Augusta Sakai, Sergey Spivak, and Ariana Lipsky versus Priscilla Cachoeira. The prelims are going to be headlined by Sam Alvey and Mikhail Okelesuk, I believe it's pronounced. Olescu?
Yeah, I think the second way you pronounced it is right.
Olescu. Okay. Um, so actually, briefly looking at that main event, Thiago Santos. I mean, you think this is kind of a must win because he's lost 4 of his last 5. Meanwhile, you got Jamal Hill, who's 10-1 and had that huge knockout over Johnny Walker last time out. It's kind of must win for Santos here to have even the slightest chance of maintaining, a top contender status at light heavyweight. And for Santos, this is also a huge opportunity. I mean,
Yeah,
Hill, pardon me.
I think for sure this is Jamal Hill's biggest fight of his career. As you said, 10-1. Santos has fought for the title before, lost 4 out of 5. I think this is one of those fights where if Santos loses, that's now 5 out of his last 6. It would be hard to keep him around. I know he's still one of the best in the world, but losing 4 out of 5 or 5 out of 6, however you want to look at it, is just simply not a good look. And I really do feel like Hill in a main event spot. It's hard not to like him in that one.
Definitely, definitely. Uh, I think one fight that interests me, I didn't keep up too as much on this tough season as I did the other, but that heavyweight tough finale fight, Zach Pogo, because I've heard his name and seen his stuff, on the regional circuit, and then you have Mohammed Usman. Now, I have to ask you, Zach, do you think maybe the UFC is kind of leaning a little more towards Usman, like the hope that he pulls off the victory here? Because imagine how you can market him at heavyweight.
Yeah, I am. I would be pulling for Usman in that one. And I just want to ask you, now that the tough season is over, I watched it religiously. I watched every episode. I just wanted to get your quick take before we go into the tough finale fights. What did you think of the season overall? Did you think the quality of fighters was good? Do you like that the Ultimate Fighter is back
I
consistently?
I
I
like
kind
it.
of, I kind of want to hear your thoughts about just the season as a whole.
I mean, I like it, but I feel like last season you had a lot of you had a lot of top prospects, and you had that feeling of oh, tough is back. It's tough time. Like finally it's back. And now it kind of feels like that little return magic's kind of worn off to me. I don't know if you feel. I know you watch it religiously. I don't know if you're feeling the same way across MMA, media and MMA Twitter.
Yeah, for sure. Do you mind? Actually, my audio cut out. Do you mind? Do you mind repeating what you just said?
Basically, I feel like kind of the return magic has kind of disappeared.
Yeah, I could see that.
Like now it's just, another thing UFC does, like contender series and the fight night cards every week. Because like fight night, even fight night, remember we always used to get like maybe once a month, and now it's every week, and now it's like, sometimes we get some very weak events. So it's like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
obviously,
Yeah,
obviously tough isn't as egregious, but as the fight nights, because fight nights are every week, but I do think, Usman, Poga, good, heavyweight final. I feel like they deserve it. And then you got Juliana Miller and Brogan Walker.
yeah,
Uh,
and I gotta say, Juliana Miller was my favorite fighter on the show, and I'm happy she's getting her shot because she deserves it. She has a lot of skills, and she looks way better than what her 2-1 record is advertised. I do think Rogan Walker's a tough out, but I do think the pressure and the wrestling in this fight will dictate how the fight's going to go. I could see Juliana Miller stopping her within 2 rounds, or I could see Walker winning a really close decision. What do you think?
uh, I could see Miller winning this one. I think Miller is going to be my pick. I'm going to go double blue corner on this one. At least they're listed as the blue corner on the card that I have. Usman and Miller. I think I'm going to go double blue corner for tough.
Yeah, that's how I get into on mine, which is courtesy of Tapology. If you guys don't use Tapology, you should. I
Mm-hmm.
would go. I would go double blue corner for the tough finale fights as well. Which that's kind of the main reason why I'm tuning into the card is to watch the two tough finals because I think they're both very interesting, and I think it's great for the UFC if Usman in that fight, just considering that there's the brother tandem there and Paega's a foul too, so I feel like even if he loses, it's not going to be the last time we'll ever see him compete in MMA or in the UFC for that matter. But I just think Usman will be way too much.
I agree. I agree with Usman. I think Usman has the capabilities. I mean, he's got a champion brother in his corner. He's had his own great fights on the regional scene and in, I believe, PFL as well. So
Mm-hmm.
I feel like Usman's got a whole bunch of momentum in his corner. Uh, as far as Thiago Santos, Jamal Hill goes, I would not be surprised if Santos is tough, but I could see either it being a one-sided decision or I could see a finish. I could see Hill finishing Santos. If he finishes Santos, I think that's going to strap the rocket and say, okay, it's time to give Hill a good challenge in his next outing.
Mm-hmm. I have to ask. I know this is further down the card, but are you just as excited as I am to watch Terrence McKinney fight again?
What happened? I'm sorry.
I said I know this is way further down the card,
Mm-hmm.
but are you just as excited to watch Terrence McKinney fight again?
Yes. I know maybe he doesn't have the same magic. Like I mentioned, the same magic with the. I know maybe he doesn't have the same magic, but he is definitely a name I want to watch on that undercard. Jason Witt as well. But if we're going to talk about the undercard, I'm going to counter a question with a question. Sam Alvey. This guy just seems to have chance after chance. But I don't. Is this next one? Do you think this is it?
I think this next one is it. He's fought in a lot of really close fights. He's fighting a relatively up and coming stud, and I just feel like at this point, Alvey's had a run at it. He's one of those, I wouldn't say journeyman fighters, but he's one of those fan favorites, like a Clay Guida, where they like to
Correct.
where they like to keep him around because he's in fun fights. But do they necessarily need him? The answer to
No.
that question is no. And I
No, and
really
he's
do.
0-7-1. The 0-7-1 in his last 8. People have been cut for way less than that.
I know. But yeah, I just feel like if he loses this one, which he should, there's a solid chance that could be his last fight for sure. Um, and yeah, speaking of Ultimate Fighter alums, Brian Battles also on this card. He's fighting Takashi Sato, which I
That's
mean,
that's another one of those undercard fights. That's what I want to see too. I
yeah,
like Brian Battle, and I
yeah.
think Sato's going to be a good challenge for him.
I think if he can get through that one, there could be some big fights coming up for him at 170 into 2023 and 2024. But I'll be honest with you, this entire card, just for the fan that doesn't really watch this card, I'd say if you're someone who maybe only watches a couple UFCs a year and you see this card as an advertisement, the fights I would really focus on are fights 9 through 12. That's really the heart of the entire card. And I feel like if those fights deliver, it's hard not to say that the card was a success. And I am really excited for those two Ultimate Fighter fights, as we both said. And it just goes to show that Team Pena really dominated Team Nunes throughout the season. And if they can win their fights Saturday, there's a good chance that Pena's team will be the further superior team at the end of the tough season officially. So
Kind of
another tough season's over, and yeah, I mean it'll be a very interesting main card for
kind,
sure.
kind of ironic that Pena's team dominated the season. Might dominate the finale if we have it our way, but the championship fight, she was the one dominated.
For sure.
But briefly, let's also talk about the PFL playoffs. So we've got. So it's funny. We actually have, according to Tapology, post limbs. Well, prelims and post limbs, but of course, the big focus is going to be uh, the light heavyweight tournament fights with Amari Akhmedov and Josh Silveira and Rob Wilkinson versus De La Monte. And then the light, I think with me, the big one, the light heavyweights, Olivier Aubin-Mercier, Alex Martinez, Anthony Pettis, and Stevie Ray. I definitely like that lightweight final four for the PFL.
Oh, for sure. I have to ask you this: is Aubin-Mercier's run in the PFL just absolutely insane, or what? It seems like every single fight of that guy since he's been with the PFL has over delivered.
He has been quietly building himself back up in the PFL. And, I know his, like I have it here, he's got decisions. He doesn't have the finishes in the PFL, but slowly he's been building himself back up to the point where I'd say he should be considered a big wild card for this. Like if you put him as, your second favorite to win, or even your first favorite to win the tournament, I'm not shocked. I wouldn't be shocked if he pulls it off here, and then takes on either Pettis or Ray in the final in November, and he puts on at least a hell of a showing. Olivier Aubin-Mercier is one you got to watch out for. I do say the PFL, though, maybe they kind of been trying to, with Pettis, maybe for Pettis, this is a little bit of a makeup run. And with, Pettis, it was not, last year was not good. Let's be honest. Last year was tough to watch Anthony Pettis, but, is this a matter of he had easy opponents in his 2 regular season fights and Stevie Ray might change that? Or is this...
You could argue that.
Or is this this? That's what this fight is going to tell us with Pettis and Ray. It was Pettis's first season fights just too easy, or is this really comeback season for Pettis?
True. Very true.
But I definitely might have to. But I'm going to. I mean, you look at Stevie Ray. Meanwhile, with the regular season, look back on his 2 fights. He actually defeated Anthony Pettis in the regular season, and then prior to that had the loss to Alex Martinez. So it's not, Stevie Ray has experience with these guys, and he did beat Pettis before. So this could be a bit of a trap fight that, maybe people will go Pettis, but Ray is the guy, though. Ray, I could actually see a Ray versus OAM lightweight final.
If it were me, I'm taking Stevie Ray. I'd like to see Anthony Pettis win just because the storyline would be better, but it's hard for me just with how much Pettis has struggled as of late. I know he did win his 2 regular season fights, but I
was corrected. He actually lost to Stevie Ray in that second fight. So
interesting. You're right. But
I completely misremembered that.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say. So actually, I know PFL is tough to bet. Anybody who watches Die Hard MMA pod with Klein will know that. But Stevie Ray very secretly could be a good bet this week.
I could see it.
Like Stevie Ray and Jamal Hill, the 2 main event blue corner fighters in this weekend's cards. Those might be your best bets of this week.
Mm-hmm. And if you want to go one step further, if you want to do a 4-legger, you do those 2 guys, Ray and Hill, and then you take the 2 Ultimate Fighter contestants in the blue corner, put it together. It's probably a decent payout.
Oh, that'd be great. Even if you don't do the PFL one, just like a 3-legger, with all 3 major blue corner fighters. And then maybe if you want to throw in Jeff Neal, but I don't know how he'll do against Vicente Luque. I just know Neal needs a little bit of a bounce back performance. I don't know if Luque is going to give it to that one. But if you want to go with Usman, Miller, and Hill, at least on the UFC side, that's a good one. Actually, I kind of have a good feeling about that one.
Mm-hmm.
So that actually is going to do it for our first show, Zain. I think this was pretty fun. I'm excited to do this every week.
And as you know, and as you can look at the bottom ticker, you can follow me and Tom on social media. I can plug my stuff first. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Zain Bando 99. My DMs are always open for questions. You can always follow Empty the Bench. You can follow this new podcast, the MMA Outsiders, on Twitter. If you just search the name of the show, it's one of the first Twitter accounts.
At MMA Outsiders ETB.
Yes, exactly. Tom, really quick, do you want to plug your stuff before we get out of here?
Yeah. So just follow me. You see actually our social media is scrolling across the bottoms here too. So if you want to follow us there, and also don't forget to follow me at FanSided MMA. So I'll be, you'll usually find me doing weekend recaps for all the big shows. Every now and again, a news piece. And then Zain, you join VJPen.com, so that should be fun.
Yeah, you can find my stuff there. My first 2 pieces were just posted this morning. So you'll be seeing me doing some news pieces and some other stuff. And if they ever do need me on a UFC recap every now and again, I do have experience with that, as Tom knows quite well. But if you want to know anything and everything from a fan-sided MMA perspective, Tom is your guy. He's been one of the lead guys for several years. So if you're looking to get interested into reading a new site, you couldn't recommend it enough. Tom's coverage is great, so you can follow him over there. You can also follow my stuff over at BJ Penn. That is at BJ Penn DOT.com on Twitter. BJPenn.com is where you'll find any and everything related to all of that. We have a great team over there, and we're very excited with where our current team sits right now. And we're definitely really excited to keep this podcast going every single Wednesday morning for you guys. We can't wait to do more episodes here soon to recap all of the upcoming UFC cards. We have a crazy month of August, as we said, first with the tough finale, then we have UFC San Diego, and then of course it leads right into UFC 278 with Usman Edwards 2. That is a gigantic match. We might also have to throw in there that that's the same night as Usyk versus Joshua. So we'll have a lot to cover on that particular week for sure. But for now, I'm Zain Bando. He's Tom Albano. This has been an Empty the Bench. Thank you guys very much for listening to us, and we look forward to seeing you guys next week.
Thanks for tuning in to the premiere of the MMA Outsiders, everybody. We'll see you next week. Take care.